Welcome to Capital Outsider, a show about people and ideas outside the halls of power, exploring alternatives to conventional political wisdom. Welcome to Capital Outsider. I'm John Mountier, and our guest today is Robert Ward, the author of the book New York State Government. The book covers a lot of ground, information on the history, the structure, and the functions of New York government. Bob also gives insight on reforming government and tips to citizens for how to influence change. Actually, I've known Bob, with full disclosure, for probably 40-something years, 40-plus years. But Bob, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to write this book.
Okay, John. Well, I grew up in Albany, and doing so, I've been interested in government from an early age. My grandfather actually was a Democratic committeeman in Albany. So I saw the impact that a political machine can have on people's lives for better and sometimes for worse. And I also grew up being familiar with great figures like Erastus Corning and Nelson Rockefeller. When I say great, I mean people who had a great impact on society. And so I was a newspaper reporter for a while, working at the old Knickerbocker News in Albany. Then I worked in the State Assembly for several years, where I learned the view from the inside. Then I spent 18 years working for the Business Council of New York State, doing economic analysis and studying New York's tax system and other factors that sometimes make it difficult to run a business in New York. For the last half a year or so, I've been at the Nelson Rockefeller Institute of Government, which is part of the SUNY system. And of course, the Rockefeller Institute published the book on New York State government. And it's really an attempt to explain how New York State government works, what it does, and as you said, John, to make it understandable to average citizens so that they can have an impact on our government, which is what democracy is all about.
And there's a lot in there, and I have to admit, I have not read the whole book.
Right.
I did read the parts on the reform and some of the history. Very interesting, very interesting.
Well, it's designed so people can dip in and out. You can, if you're interested in what's happening in education, obviously you can read that chapter, and then people can go to different topics at different times.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on particular agencies and the functions of different agencies. Yep. Very interesting. Bob, I understand that New York is like the federal government in a sense of its basic structure, executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. But is there any way that is different in structure or function? I mean, that's a pretty broad question. From other states or from the federal government. What makes it different? What makes it, what do we need to know about it?
I think New York and most of the states are much more similar than they are different. Every state has its own executive branch, obviously, and legislature and judiciary. One thing that makes New York different from many states is that we have a very powerful governor's office. And in the book, I make the observation that when you combine the powers that are inherent in the governor's office in New York with the very large size and power of government in New York, the governor of New York is probably the most powerful chief executive in the country other than the president himself. For instance, if you compare Eliot Spitzer or George Pataki to the powers that George Bush had when he was governor of of Texas, there's no comparison. The governor of New York is much more powerful than the governor of Texas. And so what that suggests to people is that if you are interested in changing government, if you think that something good is going on in government, a lot of credit goes to the governor. If you don't like what's happening in government here in New York, you can put a lot of the responsibility on the shoulders of the governor. And the system was designed purposely for that reason, to create accountability so that particularly in the budget, but also in other areas, the governor is very much accountable to the people. And again, the people have a course of action they can take if they, whether they like or they don't like what's going on in government.
In your book, you mentioned the executive budget as being a differentiator, and explain the whole budget process, or just give us a quick overview of the budget
Sure.
process. What makes it different with the executive budget?
Well, the most important thing for any chief executive is the ability to set the agenda and to initiate things as opposed to reacting to things. And when a governor is doing well, for instance, as Eliot Spitzer was in his first few months in office, the governor has the initiative, can seize the agenda, and kind of force the legislature to at least consider, if not act upon, the issues that the governor thinks are important. Right now, Governor Spitzer's popularity obviously has gone down somewhat. That means he has less ability to control the agenda than he did when his ratings were higher. But he still has an office that gives him, for instance, the power to initiate the budget. And in just a few weeks, Governor Spitzer will send the legislature his budget proposal for the coming year. That is very different than what happens in the federal government, where Congress has a much larger role in the process. Or again, if you look at other states such as Texas, where the legislature is much more dominant than members of the legislature are here. It's not to say that our legislature here in New York does not have a significant role to play. They certainly do. And when they are unified, when the legislature, both houses and both political parties in the legislature are strongly unified to the point where they can get 2/3 of members in each house to vote a particular way, they can override the governor and take that power away from him or her. But the basic structure of our government, again, particularly with regard to the budget process, is that it does give the governor a lot of power to initiate and to carry out the budget that the governor thinks is the right way to go.
What prevents the legislative leaders from proposing their own budget? I mean, it seems like they do anyway, right? To some extent?
The legislature takes the governor's budget, and they have the power to amend it, but they have to work off the fundamental structure that the governor gives them.
Okay.
So that's another key part of the governor's power here in New York, which is different from other states. And the governor, as we've seen in some very important court decisions that have come down over the last couple of years, the governor can write into the budget changes in statutes that determine how dollars are spent. So he can put in proposals that not only relate to the amount of money, but also how those dollars are spent. Again, the legislature can change those things, but there are very tight limits on the extent to which the legislature can change it. So without going into a lot of detail, the legislature's real power with regard to the budget is, first of all, the ability to strike out anything that the governor, or to delete items that the governor has in the budget that the legislature doesn't like. That doesn't happen an awful lot because legislators like to spend money and deliver things to their constituents. Then they have the power to add things to the budget. And the budget obviously does not become final until the legislature acts upon it. So the main game in Albany during budget season, once the governor has proposed the budget, is for the legislature to figure out how much can we add overall and where will we distribute those additional dollars to education, health care, and other programs.
Okay. Well, we're on the topic of the governor's power, Governor Spitzer's power in particular. What can you tell us about laws? One of the things that really confused me recently with Governor Spitzer's proclamation, basically, that he was going to change the way driver's licenses were issued, in fact, in order to give them to illegal aliens, was that there was laws. There is a law on the books that said the commissioner must get a Social Security number before he can give a driver's license. Mm-hmm. It didn't, it appeared to be state law that's what the law was. My understanding of the way law works is the legislators vote on it, the governor signs it or vetoes it. But I mean, once it is law, there's no way to proclaim it a change. But that's what seemed to happen. Am I missing something, or what was he doing? He hadn't read that law? Somebody forgot to point that out to him, or? Well,
the governor. Here in New York, in most states, but not all, the governor is very much in charge of the executive branch agencies, including the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Understand.
And again, this is where a state such as Texas is different from New York. In a lot of other states, there are more elected officials in charge of given agencies. Here in New York, we have the governor overseeing almost all the agencies, except we have the regents who oversee the education department. We have the state controller who oversees the Department of Audit and Control. And we have the attorney general who's in charge of the Department of Law. Pretty much all of the other agencies are under the control of the governor. So in this instance, the Department of Motor Vehicles has a commissioner who's appointed by the governor with the consent of the Senate. And so the governor has the ability to instruct the Department of Motor Vehicles to do things administratively or in terms of writing new regulations into the state's code of regulations that in some cases might amount to interpretations of statutes that have been enacted by the legislature. In some cases might on the surface appear to be violations or at least changes in laws, as you said. And without getting into that so much, but just making the observation that this is another area where if you are the governor, you do have a lot of power to do things, and people can take you to court, as Assemblyman Tedisco was planning to do. And I forget where that stands, whether he's still considering that.
I'm not sure.
But the initiative lies with the governor, and until a court overturns an action like that, the governor's power stands. And it's kind of the old saying, it's good to be the king. It can be good to be the governor because you do have an awful lot of agencies that have extensive powers. Another illustration of that that is just now coming to light is something affecting charter schools, which is an issue certainly in the city of Albany and in many other places throughout the state. The charter school law in New York originally was written to give organizations that opened charter schools a lot of freedom from all of the bureaucratic rules and regulations that apply to school districts. One of those was that the state's prevailing wage laws do not apply to construction of charter schools, which makes it possible to develop them more cost effectively. So some of the trade unions and others have been pushing for a long time to try to extend the prevailing wage rules to the charter schools. And on the surface, it appeared that doing so would require a change in the statute. But earlier this year, the Labor Department, the state Labor Department, promulgated a rule saying henceforth charter schools have to apply or have to use the prevailing wage rules, which will probably drive up the cost significantly, will be a benefit for construction trade unions, so it's good from their perspective, but won't necessarily be good from the perspective of the nonprofit organizations that run the charter schools, the parents who want to send their children there, and so on.
Or the taxpayers.
Or potentially the taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. It boggles my mind. I guess it's the nature of the beast. I guess it's the nature of the beast that different factions are going to have different ideas about what's right. But it seems like the law should be the law. I mean, that's sort of what the United States is about. One of the things that we're admired for around the world is the idea of rule of law. But when you have these bodies working at odds, then that's just it's just not a good thing. I mean, I guess one of the problems is in the motor vehicle law. Why was since those are apparently administrative functions, why are there so many administrative details written into the law? That seems odd in the first place, but it is there, and since it is there, you'd like the governor to uphold. I would at least like the governor to uphold the law, and if he needs to change it, well, let's go through channels. And maybe that's not, and I don't know how can we reform that, and rein in that those abuses of power. I don't know. But anyway, that brings me up to one of the important parts of your book, at least to what I think to our viewers. Our viewers are interested in, I think, at least in reforming government and, in particular, probably making it smaller. And you do offer some really good insight into what types of reforms are possible, and also ways to make those reforms happen, ways to influence government. You talk about categories of reform. This sounds like the Mao's Red Book here. 6 categories of reform and 6 aspects of citizen action. Can you talk about those a little bit? I mean, I spelled them out here in case you haven't memorized your whole book.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I've given you some bullet points to work from here.
Well, let's start with the most important thing that people should know, which is that contrary to everything you hear, you can influence your government. But you probably can't do it alone. It's very hard for any individual to walk down to the state capitol, knock on the door, and say, Governor Spitzer, I want you to pass a law that says ABC, or Senator Bruno and Speaker Silver, I want you to pass this law. That's not going to happen. However, what does happen all the time is that people get together and create organizations that do very much have an influence. And in some cases, that influence stems from money. In some cases, it stems from activism. In some cases, it simply stems from ideas, believe it or not. And certainly money talks often more loudly than ideas do. But let's just think about a couple of examples of how people in New York have managed to change things in recent years. One example is the Working Families Party, which I know you are aware of, and it's an initiative that was undertaken less than 10 years ago by the Communications Workers Union and some other unions and activist organizations. And they created a new political party which has had a dramatic impact on politics and public policy in New York. It has pushed the Democratic Party to the left. It has pushed the Republican Party to the left in many instances. It has had an impact on tax policy. It's had an impact on the minimum wage. It's had an impact on electing people like David Soares, the Albany County District Attorney, as well as individual elected officials in other areas of the state. And so this was an instance where, again, in this case, some unions came together and created a new organization, a political party. But that's not the only way that people do things. There's one thing that I imagine every viewer of this program is interested in is property taxes. And there is an increasing level of activism by property tax groups around the state, particularly in the Hudson Valley and on Long Island, where increases in property values have just driven property tax bills through the roof. And here in the capital region, we think our property taxes are pretty high, and in fact they are, but they're not like they are down in those areas. So in those areas, we have seen just regular people come together and create these groups that have not had an impact to the point of changing state law yet, but they have had an impact in terms of getting laws introduced, getting the governor and the legislature to think about things very differently. And I would guess within the next 5 to 10 years, these organizations may actually start to have an impact on what is done here in Albany.
Well, Senator Bruno actually says he has a plan to end property taxes, right?
Well, I think
Somehow.
he said that at one point.
Magic
but
plan.
I think that's you can take that as a response to the sorts of organizations that I was just talking about. Certainly, any expression by a politician of concern about property taxes is obviously going to be well received by most people. Nobody is going to be in favor of raising property taxes, generally speaking, across the board at least. But we've seen not only that, we've seen creation of the STAR program that Governor Pataki initiated. Governor Spitzer has now enhanced or expanded. And those things, the STAR program, I think, has let a little bit of the steam out of the property tax movement because it is a little bit of a palliative, if you will. But I don't think it's going to make the issue go away. Property taxes are going to continue to go up, and the state is not going to have enough money to continue taking the burden away from homeowners. So something is going to happen, I think.
I know it. I'm wondering. one of the things that is confusing to me, at least, one of the things I've been trying to encourage our local Libertarian Party chapter to do is, influence legislation. And so I've gone out on the Assembly and Senate websites in New York State to see what bills are pending, who's supporting what. And occasionally, I'm on some email list. I'll get an email say, write or call your state senator, your state assemblyman. This bill's coming up for a vote, and oftentimes it never does come up for a vote. And there are a lot of bills. In fact, eminent domain is a good example. A few years ago, there was a big citizen push to try to rein in government use of eminent domain. There's some really bad examples of where people's private property was taken from individuals and then given to other private groups. Seemed to me, at least, to be clearly in violation of the concept of what eminent domain should be for.
That's another area, by the way, where New York is very different from other states. We are more activist. Our government is more activist when it comes to using eminent domain than many states are.
Yeah, apparently it's a big deal down in New York City, where at our last state convention we had a speaker, a very good speaker. There's a giant project going on in Brooklyn that is going to take just incredible amounts of homes away from people to put up humongous development. But anyway, back to my question is, when we see these bills listed, and there were 4 or 5, 6 different eminent domain bills, some of which were reasonably good that I would have liked to support it, but they all just go no place. They get into committee and just sit in committee. How can we identify the real bills? Is there a secret code? Is there another site that we need to go to that says, yeah, these are the bills that are going to be acted on and voted on? And I know it has something to do, you write in your book, you give some really interesting examples of what happens in the state legislature because of the concentration of power in the leaders, in the hands of leaders, Silver and Bruno. Do you have any insight for us?
All right, I said a couple of minutes ago, the first lesson is to realize that you can influence state government, but you probably can't do it alone. This is an illustration of that. It's almost impossible, it probably is impossible for you, John, or any other individual to keep aware of every bill that comes into the legislature that might influence you for better or worse. There are 10,000 or more bills in a typical year, and none of us have the time to do that. And as you kind of experienced, even if you look up online and see that such and such a bill has been introduced, even if you read the text of the bill, it's very difficult to tell how that changes existing law sometimes. And so you have to have an understanding of what the existing law is in order to know how this will change it. So this is one of the reasons that it's good to create an organization where you can spread that work around a little bit, or join an existing organization and influence that organization to pay attention to the issues that you are concerned about that perhaps they are not paying attention to quite yet. So, but the second rule, and in addition to the idea that you can change government but probably not by yourself, the next big rule is you have to know the issues. And that requires a lot of learning. Again, the property tax groups that I mentioned that are cropping up in the Hudson Valley are examples of that. People are taking a lot of time to study what exactly it is that drives property taxes and things like that. Here in Albany, we have literally hundreds of interest groups, whether environmental groups or unions, business groups, trial lawyers, organizations. And so almost any issue that people would be interested in, there's probably an organization out there that is actively studying it. And maybe you agree with that organization or maybe you disagree with them. But you can go to their website and find out all kinds of interesting things. So that's one good habit to get into. The second one is I really recommend that people call their own legislators and say, I want to come to your office, and not necessarily talk to the legislator himself or herself, because they can't do this with a lot of people. But I want to at least talk to one of your staff members, and I want them to explain to me what this bill does. Or even if it's not a particular bill, I want to talk to them about this particular subject and have them help me understand what's going on and where things are going with this issue. That's a reasonable request, in my opinion. And the other big recommendation I would have for people who want to be activists is write a letter to the editor. Don't just write to your legislator. Write a letter to the newspaper, but don't bother writing that letter unless you're going to name a name. Put into that letter, I want Senator so-and-so to do this, or I want Assemblyman so-and-so to oppose this bill. When they see their name in the paper, they notice. If you write a bill that says taxes are bad, it has no impact. If you write a bill that says taxes are bad and Senator so-and-so isn't doing anything about it, that makes them notice.
Okay. But as far as this code, as far as the secret list of the real bills versus the fluff bills, a lot of the bills seem to be sponsored just because somebody went into their office and complained, the senator or assemblyman, okay, I wrote a bill, it got stuck in committee, it's not my fault.
Right.
That seems to be a good chunk of the bills. And how do you distinguish the real ones from the phony ones? Is there a way?
Not without a lot of work.
Yeah.
So you have to pick your battles.
Yeah.
You have to, again, identify other people you can work with, whether it's citizens, whether it's an existing organization, whether it's getting together with others to create an organization that can target a particular piece of a broader issue, or whether it's finding a champion in the legislature. And that can be difficult because every member of the legislature has hundreds or thousands of people clamoring for their time. But with attention and with persistence, you can make things happen.
Understood. Well, one of our problems, I think, has historically been our goal is so far from where we are that we have a hard time focusing on a single issue. And I agree with it. The successful movements have been more or less single issue, and we need to probably cooperate more with those groups that are knowledgeable and functioning well in a particular area. And we do try to affiliate occasionally, but we haven't really been too successful at it up to this point. We only have a little bit of time left, but do you have any general comments on the situation that we're facing in New York today, where we seem to be in total gridlock right now because of the bad relationship between Governor Spitzer and Senator Bruno? And I think we only have about 15 seconds. I think.
Very quickly, we're not really in gridlock. The fights that go on at the level of the governor and the Senate Majority Leader get all the attention. Meanwhile, a lot of things are happening at the staff level. They're working on next year's budget. They're working on expanding health care and other issues. You can agree or disagree with those policies, but things are happening in Albany.
Yeah, and actually it looks like the NYRA thing is going to get solved after surprisingly.
I imagine it will.
Well, anyway, I think we're out of time. I'd like to thank Bob for being with us tonight. This is a great book. I want to recommend it to everybody in New York State government.
You can buy it at the Bookhouse in Stuyvesant Plaza or Amazon.com.
Okay. And I'm John Mountier, your host, and thanks for joining us tonight.